I didn't call the police. That's what shocks people when they hear this story. Not the bruises, not the lies, not even what I did next. It's that one choice. Because when my twin sister walked into my shop that morning, her face swollen, her lips split, her eyes trying not to meet mine. Everything in me, every instinct I'd built over years in uniform told me to act fast, act loud, make it official. Instead, I locked the front door. And I listened. My shop sits on a quiet street just outside Dayton, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a small place where I restore old furniture, sharpen tools, and fix things most people would rather throw away. Folks my age understand the value of repair. You don't toss something just because it's worn. You look at what's still good. You decide if it's worth saving. That morning started like any other. Coffee was still warm on the counter. The radio played some soft country tune I didn't bother to recognize. I had an oak dresser laid out in pieces, sanding one of the drawers smooth. When the bell over the door chimed, I didn't even look up right away. I just said, "Be with you in a minute." No answer. That's what made me turn. She stood just inside the doorway like she wasn't sure she had the right to come in. Same height as me, same build, same face, almost. Except mine had lines from years and sun and discipline. Hers was bruised. Purple across the cheekbone, yellowing near the jaw, a fresh split on her lip. Her left eye slightly swollen like she'd tried to ice it but hadn't caught it in time. For a second, my mind did something strange. It tried to reject what I was seeing, like when you look at a photograph that doesn't quite make sense. "Emma," I said. She nodded, but her eyes stayed low. Always the same when she was hurting. Even as kids, she hated being looked at when something was wrong. I set the sandpaper down, walked over slow, not rushing, not crowding her. "Who did this?" I asked. She swallowed, shook her head. I'm okay," she said quietly. That was when I locked the door. Not dramatic, just reached over, flipped the sign to closed, turned the deadbolt. The little click echoed louder than it should have. She noticed. "You don't have to—" "I do," I said. I led her to the chair by the back table, the one I use when customers need to sit a spell. I grabbed the first aid kit without thinking. Old habit. She didn't flinch when I cleaned the cut on her lip. That bothered me more than the bruises. "You've had worse," I said mostly to myself. She gave a faint, humorless smile. "Not since we were kids." That took me back. 2 girls in a small house. Same face, different ways of dealing with the world. I was the one who stood in front. She was the one who endured behind me. I thought we'd outgrown that. "Emma," I said again, softer this time. "Look at me." She didn't. So I waited. Time does something to you when you get older. You stop chasing answers. You let them come. After a while, she lifted her eyes just enough. "They didn't mean it," she said. That sentence. I've heard it before. Not in my shop, not in my home, but in places where people say things they think will keep everything from falling apart. Who I asked carefully didn't mean it. Her lips pressed together. I saw the hesitation, the calculation, the part of her that was trying to protect something. Or someone. "Jason's boys," she said finally. I leaned back just a little. Not because I was surprised. Because I wasn't. Jason, her husband. Widower when she met him. 2 sons, late teens now. I'd met them a handful of times. Polite enough when their father was around. Quiet in that way that feels more like watching than listening. "How long?" I asked. "It's not like that," she said quickly. "How long, Em?" She didn't answer. That was my answer. I moved back to the counter, rinsed my hands in the sink. Needed a second to settle the noise in my head. Anger doesn't help if you let it lead. It clouds things, makes you miss details. And details matter. "Where's Jason?" I asked. "Work, out of town." Of course he was. And he knows. She hesitated again. He thinks, we're just having some issues. I let out a slow breath. Does he know they're putting hands on you? Silence. That told me enough. I turned back to her. Why didn't you call me? She gave a small shrug. You've got your life. I didn't want to. Don't, I said, not harsh, just firm. Don't finish that sentence. Her eyes welled up then, finally. Not dramatic, just quiet tears that sat heavy in the corners. I thought I could handle it, she whispered. That one hurt. Not because she was wrong, but because she was trying to be strong in the wrong direction. I pulled up a chair across from her, sat down, really looked this time not just at the injuries, but at the way she held herself. Shoulders slightly forward, hands clasped too tight in her lap, the posture of someone trying to make themselves smaller in their own life. "You're not staying there tonight," I said. She shook her head immediately. "I have to. If I don't go back, they'll..." "They'll what?" She didn't answer. Fear has a way of filling in blanks without words. I leaned forward just a bit, lowered my voice. "Listen to me. You're safe here. You can stay as long as you need." She looked at me, then really looked. Same eyes as mine. But where mine had learned to hold steady, hers still carried that old instinct to yield. "It's not that simple," she said. "Nothing ever is." I nodded slowly. "Okay, then help me understand." And for the next hour, she did. Not all at once, not clean, pieces like broken glass you have to pick up carefully. "It started small," she said. "Comments, disrespect, testing boundaries, then pushing them. Then, one night a shove, another night something thrown, apologies that didn't stick. Jason brushing it off. Boys will be boys." Until they weren't. I listened without interrupting, asked questions when needed, let her tell it in her own way. By the end of it, I had a picture. Not complete, but clear enough. I stood up, walked back to the counter, picked up my phone. She watched me, tension snapping back into her shoulders. "You calling the police?" she asked. I looked at the screen. Then I set the phone down. "No," I said. Her brow furrowed. "Why not?" "Because I'd seen what happens when you move too fast without understanding the ground you're stepping on. Because this wasn't just about stopping something.
It was about ending it."
I turned back to her. "You trust me?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Good," I said quietly, "because we're going to do this a different way." Her eyes searched mine, uncertain. "What do you mean?" I studied her face, the bruises, the fear, the part of her that still believed she had to go back and endure. And then I said it. "We're going to switch places." She blinked. "What?" "You're getting out of that house," I said. "For a few days, maybe more. And you, I'm going in." The room went very still. "Clara." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You don't understand. I understand enough," I said. And I did. I didn't need to feel what she felt to recognize the pattern. I didn't need to guess what would happen next if nothing changed. I stepped closer, lowered my voice again. "They think they know who they're dealing with," I said. "They don't." She stared at me somewhere between fear and disbelief. "Clara, this isn't like when we were kids." "No," I said, "it's not." And that was exactly why I wasn't going to handle it like we were. I picked up my keys, turned off the radio. The shop fell quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Then I looked at her one more time. "You're not going back there," I said. "Not as yourself." I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid. Because I was thinking. Emma stayed in the spare room above the shop. It's nothing special, just an old bed, a dresser. I restored myself and a window that looks out over the parking lot. But it's quiet, safe. The kind of quiet that lets your mind slow down if you let it. She didn't turn the light off until after midnight. I could see the glow under the door when I passed by on my way to the back. I didn't knock. Some things you don't rush. Instead, I made tea. Chamomile. Something our mother used to make when we were little and one of us had a bad day. I left the mug on the small table outside her door. Didn't say anything. Just let her know she wasn't alone. By morning, the bruises looked worse. That's the thing people don't always realize. Time doesn't soften damage right away, it reveals it. Colors deepen, swelling shifts. What looked manageable the day before starts telling a different story. Emma came downstairs slowly, one hand on the railing. "Morning," I said like nothing was wrong. She nodded. "Morning." I poured her coffee without asking. She used to take it with cream, no sugar. I hadn't forgotten. She noticed. "Still remember," she said quietly. "Some things stick," I replied. We sat across from each other at the small table near the window. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just sipped coffee, listened to the distant sound of a truck passing on the road. Finally, she said, "I kept thinking about what you said." "About switching places." She nodded. "And I don't like it," she admitted. "I didn't expect you to." She set her mug down, fingers lingering around it like she needed the warmth. They'll know, she said, eventually. Maybe I said, but not right away. You think you can just walk in there and pretend to be me? I held her gaze. We're twins, Em. That's not what I mean. I knew. She meant the way we carried ourselves, the way we spoke, the way we reacted. The things that can't be copied just by wearing the same clothes. I'm not trying to be you, I said. I'm trying to see what's really happening in that house. She shook her head. You don't understand them. Then help me, I said. That stopped her. I leaned forward slightly, not pushing, just steady. Tell me everything, I said, not the version you think sounds reasonable, the truth. She hesitated. Then she started talking. She told me about mornings when the boys wouldn't come downstairs until she called them 3 or 4 times. About the way they ignored her, talked over her, dismissed her like she wasn't part of the house. She told me about the first time one of them raised his voice, how it shocked her more than it should have. Jason said they were adjusting, she said. That I needed to be patient. Were you? She gave a small, tired smile. I tried. Then it escalated. Doors slammed, dishes left out on purpose, little acts of defiance that built over time. And then one night, she said, her voice dropping, I told them they couldn't have people over while their dad was gone. I already knew what came next. They laughed, she said, like I was a joke. Her hands tightened around the mug again. One of them, Mark, he stepped closer. Not enough to touch me, just enough to make a point. What point? That I wasn't in charge. I nodded slowly. And the other one? Evan, she said. He just watched. That told me more than anything else she'd said so far. The quiet ones are the ones you have to pay attention to. What happened after that, I asked. She looked down at the table. I backed off, she admitted. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. And they learned something, I said. She didn't respond. But I could see it in her face. She knew. By the time she finished, I had a clearer picture. Not just of what they'd done, but of how they'd gotten there. This wasn't random. It was a pattern. A slow erosion of boundaries. And once people learn there are no consequences, they keep going. I still think we should call the police, she said after a while. I didn't dismiss it. That's an option, I said. But it comes with consequences, I said. For you, for them, for the whole situation. They hurt me, Clara. I know. Shouldn't that be enough? I paused. In some cases, yes, I said. But you don't just want this to stop. You want to live in that house without looking over your shoulder. She didn't answer. Because she knew I was right. Calling the police might stop it, I continued. Or it might make things worse in the long run. Resentment, escalation, legal battles. So what are you saying, she asked. I'm saying we need to be smart about this. She leaned back, frustration creeping into her expression. You always say that, she muttered. And it's kept me alive, I replied calmly. That softened her a little. Not much, but enough. We spent the rest of the morning going over details. Her routine. The layout of the house. Where things were kept. What time the boys usually came home. The small things most people don't think about. By the end of it, I could walk through that house in my mind without ever stepping foot inside. That's a little unsettling, she said at one point. It's preparation, I said. For what? For not being surprised? Around noon, I made a call. Not to the police. To a travel agency I trust. Small place, run by a woman named Linda who doesn't ask unnecessary questions. I need a last-minute booking, I told her. For you. No, I said. For my sister. A pause. Everything okay? It will be. She didn't push. Just said where to. I glanced at Emma. Somewhere quiet, I said, near the water. When I hung up, Emma was watching me. You already decided, she said. Yes. She stood up, pacing a little. I don't like this, she said again. I know. What if something goes wrong? I met her eyes. Then I'll handle it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, I said. The ticket was for the next morning. 3 days, maybe more if needed. Just long enough for me to see what's really going on, I told her. And then what? Then we decide the next step. She crossed her arms. And if they realize it's not me, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They won't, I said. Not right away. That evening we packed. Not much. Just enough to make it believable. Her clothes, her phone, her bag. We stood in front of the mirror together at one point. Same face, same features, but two very different lives written into them. You really think this will work? She asked. I adjusted the collar of her jacket. I think I said slowly that they've gotten used to a version of you that doesn't push back. She swallowed. And you, I'm not that version. Before bed, she stopped me in the hallway. Clara. I turned. What if they hate me after this? She asked. I considered that. Then they'll have to learn how to deal with that, I said. And Jason? That's on him, I replied. He's the one who should have stepped in before it got this far. She nodded, but I could tell she was still carrying the weight of it. Family does that? Even when it shouldn't. That night I finally lay down. Stared at the ceiling. Went over everything again. The plan. The risks. The unknowns. And one thing became very clear. This wasn't just about protecting Emma. It was about making sure this didn't happen again. Not to her. Not to anyone else in that house. In the quiet of that room, I made a decision. I wasn't going in there to scare them. I wasn't going in there to punish them. I was going in there to change something. And people don't like change. Especially when it forces them to face themselves. I've never believed in rushing into a situation you don't fully understand. That's how people get hurt. Or worse, make things worse. Emma's flight left just after sunrise. We drove to the small regional airport outside Dayton, the kind of place where people still nod at each other in line, where security feels more like routine than tension. She barely spoke during the drive. Just looked out the window, fingers tracing small circles on her bag. I let the silence sit. You can still change your mind, she said as we pulled into the parking lot. I turned off the engine. So can you, I replied. She shook her head. If I go back there, nothing changes. No, I said, it doesn't. We sat there a moment longer. Then she reached for the door handle, paused, and turned back to me. What if I don't recognize you when this is over? She asked. That one caught me off guard. I studied her face, the worry behind the question. You will, I said. I'm still me. She gave a faint smile. You've always been more than that. I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't. At the gate, she hugged me. Not quick, not casual. The kind of hug you don't rush because you don't know what the next few days will bring. Be careful, she whispered. I always am, I said. But she pulled back and looked me in the eye. Not like that, she said. Be kind. I held her gaze. I will, I said. And I meant it. I watched her board. Waited until the plane pulled away. Only then did I turn around and head back to the truck. No second thoughts. No hesitation. Just a plan moving forward. The drive to her house took about 40 minutes. Suburban stretch, quiet streets, lawns trimmed just enough to show effort but not perfection. The kind of neighborhood where people wave but don't ask too many questions. I parked a block away. Not because I had to, because I always like to observe first. I walked the rest of the way. Not rushed, not slow. Just present. The house looked exactly like I remembered. 2-story, neutral siding, small porch with a couple of chairs that had seen better days. Nothing about it screamed trouble. That's usually how it is. Trouble doesn't advertise itself. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking it in. Windows closed, no movement inside. Then I walked up to the front door, used the key Emma had given me, and stepped inside. The air felt heavy. Not physically, something quieter than that. Like a place where tension had settled into the walls over time. I closed the door behind me, set my bag down, listened. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. They weren't home yet. Good. That gave me time. I moved through the house slowly, not snooping, learning. The living room was cluttered, not messy, just careless. Shoes left near the couch, a half-empty soda can on the table, a video game controller sitting on the floor. Small things. But they tell a story. Kitchen next. Dishes in the sink, not many, just enough to show they weren't cleaning up after themselves. Emma's touch was still there, organized cabinets labeled containers, but it was being ignored. I opened the fridge. Food stacked unevenly, takeout boxes shoved to one side. Again, a pattern. Upstairs, I paused at the hallway. 3 doors. Emma's room. The boys' rooms. Bathroom at the end. I stepped into Emma's room first. Clean, orderly, bed made, everything in place. A space she was trying to hold together. Then I checked the other rooms. Mark's room was loud posters, clothes, scattered a sense of constant motion even when empty. Evan's room? Quiet. Too quiet. Neat, controlled? That confirmed what I'd already suspected. Different personalities. Different approaches. Same problem. By the time I came back downstairs, I had what I needed. Not everything, but enough to start. I heard the front door open around 4:15. Voices, laughter. Then the shift. The moment they realized someone was home. "Hey," Mark called out. I was in the kitchen. Back turned. Just like Emma would be. "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice even. Footsteps approached. I could feel the energy change before I even turned around. That slight edge. The expectation. The test. I faced them. Mark stood a little taller than I remembered. Leaner. More confidence in his posture, but not the kind that comes from discipline. The other one, Evan, hung back slightly, watching. Always watching. "You're home early," Mark said. "Plans changed," I replied. He shrugged. "Cool." But his eyes lingered. Looking. Measuring. I didn't give him anything to work with. We moved through the motions. Dinner talk, small exchanges. I kept it simple. Didn't overplay anything. Didn't challenge them. Not yet. You don't walk into a situation and flip the table on day one. You let people show you who they are. Later that evening it happened. Not big. Not dramatic. But clear. Mark left his plate on the table and started to walk away. Emma would have picked it up. Quietly. Without saying anything. I didn't. Mark 1 said. He paused, turned back slowly. "Yeah. Take care of your plate." A beat. Just a second. But it stretched. He stared at me. Like he was waiting for me to back down. I didn't. Since when he asked. Since now, I said. My tone didn't change. Didn't rise. Just steady. Evan looked up from his phone. Watching. Always watching. Mark smirked. Then, after a moment, he grabbed the plate, walked it to the sink. Didn't say anything else. But I saw it. That flicker. Confusion. Uncertainty. Small wins matter. Not because they're victories. Because they shift expectations. Later that night I heard footsteps in the hallway. One of them pacing. Restless. I didn't move. Didn't react. Just listened. Learning. Lying in bed, I replayed the day. Their reactions. Their posture. The way they tested boundaries. And how quickly things shifted when those boundaries held. It wasn't about force. It never is. It's about consistency. Clarity. And the willingness to stand still when someone expects you to step back. I closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Just to think. This wasn't going to be solved in one moment. It wasn't going to be fixed with one conversation. It was going to take time. Pressure. And the right kind of choices. Down the hall, a door shut. Quiet. Controlled. Evan. I filed that away. Because if Mark was the one pushing forward, Evan was the one deciding how far things could go. And I hadn't seen everything yet. Not even close. By the second day, the house had already begun to change. Not outwardly. The mail still came at the same hour. The dog next door still barked at passing delivery trucks. The evening news still hummed from the living room if one of the boys turned it on and forgot to watch it. But inside that house, something small and important had shifted. They no longer knew what to expect from me. And when people lose the comfort of predicting you, they start making mistakes. I woke before dawn the way I always do. For a few seconds in that gray stillness between sleep and morning, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the unfamiliar ceiling, the floral lamp on the nightstand, the framed beach photograph Emma had kept on the far wall, and I remembered. I listened. No footsteps upstairs, no pipes running, no doors opening. Just silence. I got dressed, tied my hair back the way Emma wore hers around the house, and went downstairs. The kitchen felt colder than it had the day before. I turned on the light over the stove and started coffee. Not because I wanted any, because routines calm a house, even a troubled one. By 6:30, I had eggs going in one pan and toast warming in the oven. At 7, Mark came down first. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw breakfast. "What's this?" he asked. "Breakfast," I said. He gave a short laugh, like maybe I was joking. "You don't usually cook on weekdays." I buttered the toast. Maybe I should have started sooner. He watched me for a second, trying to hear something underneath the words. Then Evan appeared in the doorway behind him, quiet as ever, already dressed, his face unreadable. He took in the table, the plates, the way I was standing, and his eyes narrowed just slightly. That boy noticed everything. "Sit down," I said. Mark didn't move. "We're not in kindergarten." "No," I said, "you're not. Which means you can sit at a table without making a production out of it." The room went still. Not because I raised my voice. Because I didn't. Mark looked over at Evan, maybe expecting backup, maybe just checking whether he'd imagined the firmness in mine. Evan pulled out a chair and sat. That was all it took. Mark sat too. I served the eggs, poured coffee, put juice on the table. No one thanked me. I hadn't expected them to. For a minute or two, all I heard were forks against plates and the low hum of the refrigerator. Then Mark said Dad called last night. I kept my eyes on my mug, I know. He said he might be home tomorrow instead of Friday. That's good. Mark took another bite, watching me chew over the edge of his fork. You didn't tell him what happened. There it was. Not a question. A probe. I set my cup down carefully. What do you think happened? His face changed for half a second. Not guilt, not exactly. More like irritation that I hadn't followed the line he expected. I think he said slowly, "You like making things sound worse than they are." Evan didn't look up from his plate, but I saw the corner of his mouth tighten. Interesting. I leaned back in my chair. Then this is a good time for you to tell me what they are. Mark's fork stopped in midair. You always do that, he muttered. Do what? Act like we're criminals. I let a small silence sit between us. Then I said people don't feel accused unless something in them is already answering the question. That landed harder than I intended, or maybe exactly as hard as it needed to. Mark pushed his chair back. I'm done. He took his plate to the sink, but not because I asked this time. He did it because he needed motion, needed somewhere for the anger to go. Evan stayed seated. When Mark left the room, Evan finally spoke. You're different. I looked at him. He had his mother's chin from what little I remembered of the photographs in Jason's hallway, but there was something older in his eyes, something tired. People get tired, I said. That's not what I mean. No, I said, I don't suppose it is. He held my gaze for 1 second too long, then stood and carried his plate over in silence. I didn't stop him. After they left for school, I cleaned the kitchen and began paying attention to the house in the way you pay attention to a person's face during a hard conversation. Not just what was obvious. What was repeated. What was worn down. The back door lock stuck unless you lifted it slightly before turning. The cabinet under the sink had a fresh dent in it, low and hard enough to come from a kick. One dining chair had a repaired leg, but not Emma's kind of repair, quick, ugly, impatient. In the downstairs half bath, I found a small bottle of foundation tucked behind the hand soap. Wrong shade for Emma. Darker, cheap brand. Someone had been covering something in that mirror. I stood there longer than I cared to admit, looking at that little bottle like it could tell me the rest on its own. Abuse doesn't always sit in the center of a room. Sometimes it hides in corners and routines and the quiet adjustments people make to get through a day. Around 11, I called Emma from the laundry room where the signal was best. She answered on the second ring. How is it there? I asked. I could hear gulls in the background and the distant rush of water. Quiet, she said. Strange. I slept for 10 hours. Good. A pause. How bad is it? I looked out through the little side window into the backyard. A swing set stood near the fence, old and weather-faded. The seat on one side was cracked. Bad enough, I said, but not hopeless. She let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it since the plane took off. Did they know? No, I said, not yet. Another pause. Then quietly, Mark was always easier to read. Evan, I never knew what he was thinking. I'm starting to. That doesn't make me feel better. It shouldn't, I said, not yet. She was silent. Then she asked the question that mattered. Do you still think I should stay away? Yes. That came quicker than I meant it to, but I didn't take it back. Clara. Emma, listen to me. You have spent too long reacting to what happens in that house. Let someone else hold the center for a little while. I heard her swallow. All right, she said. You eat anything? A soft, almost embarrassed laugh. Yes, ma'am. Good. When we hung up, I stood there with the phone still in my hand, listening to the house breathe around me. She was resting for the first time in months. That alone told me I was doing the right thing. The boys came home separately that afternoon. Evan first. He walked in, set his backpack down, and found me in the living room going through a stack of overdue mail and school notices. He stopped in the doorway. You went through my folder. No, I said. This was on the entry table. He stepped closer. You don't usually care about stuff like that. I placed the papers back in a neat pile. Maybe I should have. He looked at me for a long moment. No anger this time, only caution. Then he said, Did Dad say anything to you? About what? About us. There is no us in that question, I said. There's behavior, and there's responsibility. His jaw tightened. You make everything sound like court. I almost smiled at that, only when people keep building cases. He turned away, but not before I saw it. Not fear. Recognition. He was beginning to understand that the old version of this house, the one that let things slide, was gone. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, loud from the start. Backpack dropped in the hallway. Fridge door opened too hard. A muttered curse when he couldn't find the soda he wanted. I waited. He found me in the den. Did you move my stuff? I put the cans in the garage fridge. There's more room. He stared at me. Why would you do that? Because this isn't a gas station cooler. That came out drier than I intended, but it had an effect. He blinked, actually blinked, then gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Okay, so that's where we are now. That depends, I said. Where were you before? He stepped forward, not enough to be a threat, enough to revisit an old habit. The old Emma would have backed up. I didn't move. That changed everything. You could see it in his face. The confusion, the recalculation, the body reading a message the mind hadn't caught up with yet. He was taller, younger, stronger in the way youth mistakes for strength. But he wasn't steadier. And he knew it. You think Dad's gonna back you up? He asked. This isn't about your father. It always is. No, I said quietly. That's been the problem. We stood there like that for a moment. Not a showdown. Something quieter, more important. Then he stepped back first. Not much. Half a step. But enough. He grabbed a soda from the garage fridge and slammed that door instead. Progress often sounds ugly at first. That night after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing things down. Dates Emma had mentioned, patterns, what I'd observed, questions I still needed answered. Mark passed through once, saw the notebook and slowed. What's that? He asked. Notes. About what? Whatever becomes important later. His face changed. Not because he understood all of it. Because he understood enough. Evan came in behind him and noticed the same thing. He didn't ask, just looked at the page, then at me, then back at the page. He knew records meant memory. And memory meant accountability. That's when I realized the lesson wasn't going to be physical, it was going to be moral. Not in the church bulletin sense. In the old-fashioned sense. Cause, effect, action, consequence. The kind too many people stop teaching once children get big enough to frighten them. Near 10 o'clock, after the house went quiet, I checked the locks and stood in the front hallway with the lights off. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Porch lamps glowing. A television flickering blue behind a curtain across the street. A dog barking once, then settling. Ordinary American life. That's what struck me most. How close pain can live to ordinary. How often it hides inside routines people assume are safe. I touched the deadbolt and thought about Emma arriving at my shop with that split lip and those lowered eyes. Then I thought about the boys upstairs. They were not monsters. That would have been easier. Monsters excuse us from responsibility. Monsters belong in stories. Boys belong to families, schools, neighborhoods, fathers who should have seen more, and women who should never have been left alone to absorb what others refused to name. No, they were not monsters. But they were dangerous. And danger left uncorrected grows bold. I turned off the hallway lamp and headed upstairs. Tomorrow Jason would come home. Tomorrow the house would have to hear the truth out loud. And once that started, none of us would get to pretend anymore. The next morning I didn't change a thing about my routine. Coffee at 6. Windows cracked open just enough to let in the cool air. The newspaper folded beside my plate even though I only skimmed the headlines. The same rhythm as the day before. Consistency matters. It tells people you're not reacting, you're establishing. Jason was due back around noon. Neither of the boys mentioned it, but I could feel it in the way they moved through the house. Mark louder than usual, doors opening and closing with just a little more force. Evan quieter, almost absent, like he was saving his attention for something later. I didn't bring it up. I let the day unfold. By 10:30, I had already cleaned the kitchen, sorted the stack of mail, and set a pot of soup on the stove. Something simple, familiar, the kind of thing Emma might make on a weekday. At 11, I sat down at the table with my notebook. Dates. Observations. Patterns. I didn't write opinions, just facts. That's something I learned a long time ago. You separate what you feel from what you can prove. Otherwise, you end up arguing instead of resolving. The front door opened at 11:52. Earlier than expected. Mark came down the stairs first, like he'd been waiting for the sound. "Dad's home," he called out. I didn't answer right away. I let Jason step into the kitchen on his own terms. He looked tired. Travel does that. Shirt-wrinkled tie loosened the weight of responsibility sitting heavy on his shoulders. But there was something else in his expression. Relief. Like coming home meant things would settle. He saw me at the table. "Hey," he said, offering a quick smile. "Didn't expect you to be home this early." "I've been here," I replied. He paused just slightly. Something in my tone didn't match what he expected. "Everything okay?" he asked. "That depends," I said. Mark leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. Evan stood behind him, quieter but just as focused. Jason looked between us, the smile fading. "What's going on?" he asked. I closed the notebook. Not slammed, not dramatic. Just finished with it. "Sit down," I said. He hesitated. "Clara?" "Sit down, Jason." I used his name on purpose. Emma wouldn't have. That caught him. He pulled out a chair slowly and sat. For a moment, no one spoke. The house felt tight, like it was holding its breath. I folded my hands on the table. "We need to talk," I said. Jason gave a small, uneasy laugh. "That doesn't sound good." "It isn't," I said. Mark shifted his weight. "About what?" Jason asked. I looked at him directly. "About your sons." The room changed. Subtle, but real. Jason leaned back slightly, defensive but trying not to show it. "They've been acting out," he admitted. "I know that. Teenagers. This isn't about acting out." He frowned. "Then what is it about?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached over and opened the notebook. Turned it toward him. Dates. Short descriptions. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing emotional. Just a record. He looked down at the page. His brow tightened. "What is this?" he asked. "Your house," I said. "Your sons. Your responsibility." Mark let out a scoff. "Are you serious right now?" I didn't look at him. Jason did. "Mark," he said, warning in his voice. But it was weak. Too late. Too uncertain. That's part of how things got this far. Jason turned back to me. "You're saying they did all this." "I'm saying it happened," I replied. "And you didn't tell me." There it was. Not concern. Not disbelief. But blame shifting. I held his gaze. "You didn't ask the right questions," I said. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Jason's face changed. Not anger. Something deeper. Recognition. Mark pushed off the doorway. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's making it sound worse than it is." I turned my head slowly. Looked at him. Not sharp. Not aggressive. Just steady. "Then explain it," I said. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at his father. Waiting. Jason hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Evan spoke then, quiet but clear. "We didn't mean it like that." All three of us looked at him. He didn't flinch. "Mean it like what I asked." He took a breath. Like hurting her, he said. The word hung there. Hurt. Not argue. Not push. Hurt. Jason's head snapped toward him. What do you mean hurt her? He asked. Evan didn't answer right away. Mark stepped in. It wasn't like that, he said quickly. She's overreacting. I stood up. Not fast. Not threatening. But enough to shift the energy. No, I said calmly, she isn't. Jason looked between us, confusion turning into something sharper. What happened? He demanded. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Necessary. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Set it on the table. I didn't call the police, I said. Jason blinked. Why would you? Because I wanted you to hear this first. I pressed play. Audio. Not video. I'd started recording the day before. Nothing illegal. Just conversations. Tone. Words. Context. Mark's voice filled the room first. Sharp. Dismissive. Then Evan's. Quieter. But no less clear. The room seemed to shrink as the recording played. Jason's face went pale. Not dramatically. Just drained. When it ended, I turned the phone off. Silence again. Longer this time. Jason ran a hand over his face. I didn't know, he said. It came out rough. Almost broken. I know, I replied. That wasn't comfort. It was fact. He looked at his sons. Really looked this time. What is this? He asked them. Mark shook his head. It's not what it sounds like. It sounds exactly like what it is, I said. He snapped toward me. Stop talking like that. I didn't raise my voice. But I didn't back down either. No, I said, I won't. That stopped him. Because for the first time, someone wasn't adjusting their tone to make him comfortable. Evan spoke again. We got carried away, he said. Jason stared at him. Carried away, he repeated. Evan nodded once. It wasn't supposed to what Jason cut in, to leave marks. Evan looked down. Didn't answer. Mark shifted again, restless. You're blowing this up, he said. It's not like we beat her or anything. The words hit the room like something dropped from a height. Jason closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, they were different. Clearer. Harder. That's enough, he said. Mark froze. Not because of the volume. Because of the tone. It had changed. Finally. I stepped back slightly. Not leaving. Just creating space. This part wasn't mine to lead anymore. Jason stood up. Looked at his sons. I should have seen this, he said. No one argued. Because it was true. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened. He turned to me. I'm sorry. I nodded. Don't say that to me, I said. His throat tightened. Say it to her. He sank back into the chair. Ran his hands through his hair. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then I said the thing that needed to be said. This doesn't end with an apology. Jason looked up. What do you mean? I mean, this changes, I said, or it gets handled another way. Mark scoffed again, but it was weaker this time. What you gonna call the cops now, he said. I met his eyes. If I need to. That was the first time I'd said it out loud. Not as a threat. As a boundary. He felt it. So did Evan. Jason straightened in his chair. What do we do, he asked. That question mattered. Not how do we fix this quickly. Not how do we make this go away. But what do we do? I leaned against the counter. You start by acknowledging what happened, I said, out loud. He nodded slowly. Then turned to his sons. Did you hurt her, he asked. Silence. Then quietly. Yes, Evan said. Mark didn't speak. But he didn't deny it either. That was enough. The room shifted again. Not lighter, but clearer. Truth has a way of doing that. I looked at all three of them. This is where it changes, I said. No one argued. Because deep down, they all knew it had to. The house didn't get quieter after that. It got honest. And honesty has a sound to it, less shouting, more weight. No one left the kitchen right away. Jason stayed seated, elbows on the table, hands clasped like he was trying to hold something together that had already come apart. Mark stood near the doorway, eyes moving between the floor and his father, restless in a way that had lost its edge. Evan had taken a step back, not hiding, just giving space. I stayed where I was near the counter. Present. But not in the middle. This wasn't my family to run. It was my sister's family to reclaim. Jason was the first to speak. "We're not moving past this," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Then he lifted his head and looked at both boys. "We're going to deal with it." Mark exhaled through his nose. "We said we were sorry." "That's not dealing with it," Jason replied. "It's a start," Evan said quietly. Jason nodded once. "It is, but it's not enough." He turned to me. "What would you do?" I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit because the answer mattered, and because I needed him to understand that whatever came next had to come from him. First, I said, "You separate the behavior from the excuses." Mark frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means you don't get to hide behind phrases like, 'we didn't mean it,' or 'it wasn't that bad,'" I said. "You look at what happened and you call it what it is." Silence. Jason nodded slowly. "All right." He looked at his sons again. "What you did was wrong. It crossed a line. More than one." Mark shifted. Jason held up a hand. "Let me finish." "That was new." Mark noticed it. So did Evan. "You disrespected her," Jason continued. "You ignored her. And then you put your hands on her. That doesn't happen in this house. Not again." The words were simple, but the tone behind them had changed. It wasn't tired. It wasn't uncertain. It was steady. And for the first time since I'd walked into that house, it came from the right place. Evan spoke first. "What do you want us to do?" he asked. That question again. Different voice. Same weight. Jason looked at me once, then back at them. "We start by being honest," he said. "With ourselves, with her, with each other." Mark crossed his arms. "So what, we just sit around talking about our feelings now?" Jason didn't flinch. "If that's what it takes, yes." Mark let out a short laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. "This is stupid," he muttered. I stepped forward just enough to be heard. "It feels stupid when you're not used to it," I said. "That doesn't make it wrong." He looked at me, irritation flashing again, but it didn't stick the way it had before. Because now his father was in the room holding the line. We moved to the living room. Not because it was more comfortable. Because it was where people usually avoid conversations like this. I wanted that space to mean something different. Jason sat in the armchair. The boys took the couch. I stayed off to the side, leaning against the wall. Not part of the circle. But not outside it either. "What happened didn't start yesterday," Jason said. "And it doesn't end today." No one interrupted him. "That means we're going to need help," he continued. Mark's head snapped up. "What kind of help?" "Professional," Jason said. "Family counseling." Mark shook his head immediately. "No way." "That's not optional," Jason replied. Evan looked at his brother, then back at his father. "Why?" Jason leaned forward. "Because I missed things I shouldn't have missed. And you two went further than you should have gone. We don't fix that by pretending we can handle it on our own." Evan nodded slowly. Mark didn't. "I'm not sitting in a room with some stranger talking about this," he said. "You will," Jason said. The firmness in his voice didn't leave room for argument. Mark saw that. And for the first time, he didn't push back right away. I watched them carefully. Not just what they said. How they held themselves. Mark's shoulders were still tight, still ready to resist, but there was something else there now. Uncertainty. Evan, on the other hand, was already adjusting, listening, processing. Different approaches. Same moment. After a while, Jason stood. "I need to call her," he said. He didn't say Emma's name. He didn't have to. He walked into the kitchen, phone already in his hand. The boys stayed where they were. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Evan leaned back, arms resting at his sides, eyes on the ceiling. Neither of them spoke. I didn't break the silence. From the kitchen, I could hear Jason's voice. Low. Careful. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just honest. That was new. That mattered. When he came back, his face looked different. Still tired. Still heavy. But clearer. "She's coming home tomorrow," he said. Mark looked up. Already. Jason nodded. "She needs to see this for herself, not hear it secondhand." Evan sat up straighter. "What if she doesn't want to come back?" Jason paused. That question hadn't crossed his mind. I could see it. If that's the case, he said slowly, then we deal with that too. Not perfect, but better. I pushed off the wall. It doesn't end with her walking through that door, I said. Jason looked at me. I know. Good, I said. Mark glanced between us. You keep saying that like there's more. There is, I replied. He frowned. Like what? I met his eyes. Like trust, I said. You don't get it back just because you say the right things for one afternoon. He looked away, because he knew that was true. The rest of the evening passed quietly. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just space. The kind of space people need when they're starting to understand something they can't ignore anymore. Later that night, I stood in the hallway again. Same spot as the night before. Same quiet street outside. But the house felt different. Not fixed. Not healed. Just shifted. Jason came up behind me. You handled that differently than I would have, he said. I didn't turn around. That's why I was here, I replied. He nodded. I should have seen it, he said again. Yes, I said. No comfort. No softening. Just truth. He exhaled slowly. Thank you, he said. I turned then. Don't thank me, I said. Do better. He held my gaze. Then nodded. I went to bed after that. For the first time since I'd arrived, I slept. Not deeply. Not without thinking. But enough. Because the hardest part wasn't what had already happened. It was what came next. And in the morning, Emma would walk back into this house. Emma came home just after noon. I was standing at the kitchen sink drying a plate I'd already dried once when I heard Jason's truck pull into the driveway. The sound of it settled something in me and stirred something else. Relief, maybe. Or caution. Usually at my age, the two travel together. I set the plate down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. No one spoke right away. The front door opened, then closed. I heard one set of footsteps pause on the mat as if the person standing there needed a second to gather herself before stepping back into the life she'd left. When Emma entered the kitchen, the room changed. Not in some grand dramatic way, more quietly than that. It changed because truth had already been spoken there, and now the person most hurt by it had arrived to hear what came after. She looked better than she had when she came into my shop. Not healed, not rested enough to erase everything, but steadier. The swelling had gone down. The bruise near her cheekbone had turned that fading yellow-green that looks ugly before it disappears. She wore a simple blue cardigan and jeans, no makeup, no attempt to cover what had happened. That mattered. Jason stood just behind her, not guiding her, not touching her unless invited. Good. He was learning. Mark and Evan were already in the room. I had asked them to be there before she walked in. Not because they liked it, because that was where they belonged. Emma's eyes met mine first. I gave her the smallest nod. You're not alone. Then she looked at the boys. Mark dropped his eyes almost immediately. Evan held her gaze for a second, then lowered his too. Jason cleared his throat. Emma, he said softly, we've been talking. She gave a tired little half smile that held no humor. That's usually what people say before something difficult. No one argued with that. I pulled out the chair at the table for her, but she remained standing. No, she said quietly, I'd rather hear it like this. So she stood, and the rest of us stayed where we were. Jason went first. I failed you, he said. There was no long speech before it, no soft let-in, no excuse. Just the truth. Emma blinked, and I saw the words hit her harder than tears would have. I thought I was keeping things together, he continued. I told myself it was stress adjustment, normal conflict. I kept choosing the easiest explanation because I didn't want to believe I'd let this happen in my own house. Emma didn't speak. She was listening the way wounded people listen, not for beauty, not for performance, but for honesty. Jason went on. I should have asked more. I should have noticed more. I should have protected you. At that, Emma's chin trembled just slightly. Then Evan spoke. We were wrong. Simple words, quiet voice, no drama. But he meant them. He looked directly at her now. I was wrong, he said. I let things go too far. I knew better. Emma's eyes moved to him, then to Mark. Mark looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, which frankly was appropriate. Shame should feel uncomfortable. That's part of what makes it useful. He swallowed once, then said, I kept thinking if I made you uncomfortable enough, you'd stop acting like this was your house. Emma stared at him. He forced himself to continue. And then I got used to doing whatever I wanted. He rubbed his hands together, looked at the floor, then back up. I told myself it wasn't serious, that I wasn't really hurting you. But I was. The room held still. Then Emma did something I wasn't expecting. She sat down. Not because she was weak, because sometimes the truth lands in the body before it lands in the mind. I moved toward her automatically, but she shook her head once and I stopped. Jason lowered himself into the chair beside her, though he kept a respectful distance. We're starting counseling, he said. All of us. I've already made the calls. Emma let out a slow breath. You did that already? Yes. She nodded faintly. Then she asked the question that mattered most. And what happens when this house gets comfortable again? That was the right question. Not what happens now in the heat of guilt. What happens later when ordinary life returns and memory starts getting lazy? Jason answered carefully. Then I don't let comfort make me blind again. She looked at him for a long time. I could almost hear her measuring whether that sentence had backbone. Then she turned to the boys. And you? Evan answered first. I don't get to be the quiet one anymore. Good, he understood his role. Mark took longer, but when he finally spoke, it was clearer than before. I get a job after school, he said. I pay for the damage in this house, and I stay away from you until you say otherwise. That one came from Jason, I was sure, but Mark said it without resentment. That mattered too. Emma's hands were folded tightly in her lap. I recognized that grip. It was how she held herself together when she was deciding whether forgiveness was possible. Not easy. Possible. Then she looked at me. Of everyone in that room, I was the one person who had seen her at her most broken and her most guarded. She didn't need permission from me, but maybe she needed confirmation that she wasn't imagining the shift. I said only this: you don't owe anyone quick forgiveness. Her eyes filled, not with helpless tears, with relieved ones. Jason bowed his head. Mark wiped his palms on his jeans. Evan sat, still listening. And Emma, after a long silence, said, I'm not ready to act like everything's fine. No one's asking that, Jason replied. Good, she said, because it isn't. Then after another pause, she added, but I'm willing to see whether this family can become honest. That was not a grand reunion. It was better. It was real. The rest of the afternoon passed in that same spirit, quiet, plain-spoken, unsentimental. Jason showed Emma the counseling appointment times. The boys carried their own dishes to the sink without being asked. Mark apologized for the dent in the cabinet. Evan admitted he had seen more than he had ever spoken about. Every truth seemed small by itself. Together they formed a kind of repair. Not complete, but begun. By evening I knew it was time for me to leave. Emma walked me out to my truck while the sky turned soft over the neighborhood. The air smelled like cut grass and somebody's charcoal grill down the street. Ordinary life again. Funny how precious that can feel after a hard week. She stood beside the driver's door and folded her arms against the breeze. You didn't call the police, she said. I looked at her. Number. Why? There are questions people ask for information, and questions they ask because they need the shape of a thing explained to their heart. This was the second kind. Because you didn't need someone to come in and shatter everything I said. You needed someone to stop the pattern long enough for the truth to stand up. She stared at me, eyes glassy in the porch light. You always were the stronger one, she whispered. I shook my head. No, I was just trained to move sooner. That made her laugh through her tears, and for the first time in days it sounded like my sister again. She hugged me then, tight, steady, not like someone falling apart. Like someone coming back together. When I pulled away, I looked once toward the house. Jason stood at the screen door. The boys were behind him, quieter than I'd ever seen them. Not fixed, but changed enough to know what they had nearly become. That is the thing I hope people remember from this story. Silence doesn't keep peace. It only rents the room to trouble. Real love has boundaries. Real families tell the truth even when it costs them comfort. And real strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the courage to say no more and mean it. If this story stayed with you, I hope it gave you something worth carrying, maybe a memory, maybe a warning, maybe even a little hope. And if you've ever seen someone suffering quietly, don't look away. Speak, reach out, stand near them. It matters more than people know. And if stories like this mean something to you, share your thoughts, pass it along to someone who may need it, and stay with us for more stories about dignity, family, and second chances.